Hi, Pete. Well, nice to see you. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself and H3C.
Okay. Nice to see you, Ben. Finally in person, face to face. This has been a pleasant experience. So my name is Pete Desjardins. I'm with a company called H3C. We are out of Omaha, Nebraska. We do chronic care management for Medicare populations. Our clients tend to be, we call them provider clients, tend to be health systems and federally qualified health centers and those type of groups. I have a varied background. I'm not sure that there's enough time to cover everything. I've been in healthcare for about 13 years.
So that's long enough. I've been in it for about 20, so we can probably share some stories. But yeah, when we first talked about a year ago, I suppose, but it must have been something like that. I know you had a lot of experience unusual amount of experience actually in different sales and marketing things that you've been involved in, obviously participated in. So I'm curious, when we first spoke and when you were sort of making this decision to work with us, what was it about our value proposition that sort of attracted you?
Well, Ben, you're right, because I've had varied experience in large companies, and I work a lot with small and mid-sized technology companies that are looking to grow. I was really intrigued with the Connex model. It sounded almost too good to be true in terms of the way that it was laid out, because for companies like ours or many other companies that are looking to grow, they typically have a very difficult time connecting with senior leadership, particularly in large organizations. And what appealed to me was sort of the way that Connex, I'm going to use the word curates, the introductions. It's kind of matchmaking a little bit. You send us an opportunity report at the beginning. All of that stuff sounded great in theory, but I was somewhat skeptical but intrigued enough to recommend that we move forward with Connex.
Yep. So in terms of actually moving forward in the actual experience of what happened, how has that been?
So I'm gonna answer your question two ways. All right. So I'm a believer in trust.
Yeah.
Trust takes two forms. Trust is integrity and also competency. All right. If you can't get past the integrity part or the relationship part, the competency oftentimes doesn't matter. So in terms of you and Connex being a valued partner, I would say it wildly exceeds expectations. You've been forthright, receptive to challenges that we've got. What I really like is you have paid it forward by making introductions that are kind of outside the scope of our agreement and showed a willingness to listen and collaborate. So those things on the integrity piece, outstanding. Similarly, on the competency piece, I was a little skeptical that you would be able to drive. I think we set an expectation of around one meeting a month. We're well beyond that. Almost without exception, the connections that you've made for us have been spot on. And I really appreciate, again, I'll use that word curation, the customer intelligence that you give us in advance of those meetings and the expectation setting. I really couldn't have asked for anything more. We're challenged oftentimes by the length of the sales cycle, and the length of the sales cycle in many cases is a function of the size of the organization we're selling into.
Yep.
So we have reasonable expectations about that, but we would have never been able to make those kind of connections without yours and Connex's help.
Yep, no, it's good to hear. The opportunity reports, you mentioned those. How do you find those helping you advance a conversation in a meeting or prior to a meeting?
So you're collecting information in some cases that is publicly available, but in most cases, I would say 2/3 of those opportunity reports is information that we couldn't get by, publicly available sources. So they're the result of primary interviews, and you also crystallize it and make it relevant so that you tie it to our solutions and our capabilities. So, without those reports, you're probably adding both time and effort into any sales cycle. And honestly, in many cases, looking at the opportunity report, starting midway through the story, because we've already shared information through you prior to that initial meeting, sometimes we reach a conclusion that, okay, the timing might not be right now, it might be sometime in the future, and under what circumstances does it make sense for my company to engage or reach back out to you? And I think that just preserves everybody's time. It creates a respect, if you will, on the part of not just, I'll mess up the terminology, your partners and your members, but I appreciate kind of the professionalism that goes into setting up those meetings. So if there was a way to even get more of that, I mean, I'm all ears. I think if anything, when meetings aren't as successful as we'd like, it's oftentimes on our side, which is fine. We're an organization that is committed to learning. So, but I'm a fan. I really am, and I've been pleasantly surprised after being through dozens of lead generation and business development type, tactical models, if you will.
Yeah. Well, that's what I think is so interesting about your background. You have so much of that. I remember from when we first spoke, you brought some of the things up you'd done before. You've been personally involved in roundtable discussion, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You got what we did really fast, which is both a good and a bad thing if I'm selling to you.
Yeah. No, I mean, I view it as good. So to your point, earlier in my entrepreneurial career, we conducted executive forum events. So think of it as 10 of the right people to dinner.
Yeah.
We use many of the same attributes that the Connex model uses. And it's very difficult to execute. And to sustain interest on both, I'll call it the buyer and the seller side. It's very difficult. I've also been impressed with this conference. It just seems right-sized. There's not an overwhelming number of people. There's not a punishing agenda where you feel like you've got to be somewhere every minute of every day. Because at the end of the day, what people are looking to do is to connect with people that they might have already talked to, which is what we use this for. So I wouldn't alter much about the conference model, to be honest. It's keeping it at the right size and the right level of, I'll use this term, intimacy.
Yep.
Where you don't feel like you're, one of thousands that are just going to get lost in the shuffle.
Yeah, no, that's true. We think a lot about that intimacy element because it is important, and I think it gives you a chance to build relationships ultimately with people, and that's the game that we're all in, really, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
Last question, I think. When we first started working with you, if you remember, we did the discovery process, spent some time to I think a couple of calls, looked at the materials.
Yep.
What was your impression of that? What were your thoughts on the value of that for H3C?
I think that's the toughest part, isn't it? Is when you have, I'll call Connex an advocate for you. It's difficult in some cases to right-size the level of information that we pass backward and forward. You've got to get an understanding, but you shouldn't be in the position where you're selling. So I think it was appropriate for us to inform and engage you as an ambassador to our solutions with the appropriate level of detail around our value proposition without trying to get too detailed so that the client, the prospective client, in some cases, if you give them too much detail prematurely, they're going to dismiss you out of hand without kind of understanding and developing a relationship. So in my view, it's not your job to sell for us. It's for you to usher us to those right situations with a good enough level of understanding of our solution so that you can feel secure that there's a match there to be made. And from there, it's incumbent upon us to form that emotional platform with the prospective client at that point in time. And that's what we're attempting to do.
If you were giving advice to someone who was doing this for the first time, and you've gone through this for the last year. I'm sure there's lessons learned, there has to be.
Sure.
What would you, the 2 or 3 sort of tidbits of advice for someone new in your position, starting to take meetings and starting to work with us?
So I would say, number one, set reasonable expectations about what can occur as a result of these meetings. I mean, understand Connex's role and where it begins and ends with, if I'm a vendor, for example, I'm making this recommendation, make sure that you don't put too high an expectation on Connex too early in regard to the outcome of those meetings. That would be one. The second thing I would really encourage people to do is, I'll use this term, exercise the relationship, like you and I have been able to do.
Yep.
So even though there's something written on paper and there's a statement of work, I've found you to be very receptive to, I'm having this challenge. Let's get on a call. Let's talk about it. It's not robotic. The relationship is not robotic. It's not transactional. It's truly a relationship. So I would encourage vendors to reach out to you or your peers to exercise the relationship, basically. And I guess I would have third one, which is probably an area that we could improve ourselves on, is given that opportunity report initially, use it as a mechanism to reach out to the prospective client before that first meeting, and make sure you've got a meeting of the minds as to what's going to be accomplished. It's almost the meeting before the meeting. But I think in retrospect, if we do more of that, I think we're going to find that we're going to get even more favorable results.
Yeah, I like that idea. Now, we talked about that a few weeks ago. And just to be clear, what that idea is to, I think, just to create some kind of specific document that we would then share with the prospect.
Yep. Or both parties, right?
But there'd be a shared document that then hopefully they've seen before the meeting, but that would be essentially we're going to be based on the opportunity report and what you do, but now very specific, so they can look at that and ahead of time. And that's sort of the basis of the meeting. Here's a sort of agenda, so they can hopefully think a little bit about it before they even speak to you, and that just advances you further into that conversation.
Exactly, and it creates more value on both sides. I mean, the opportunity reports are so good that there's a tendency to say, I'm going to read this 15 minutes before the first meeting. But in reality, if you use that as a launching pad to set an agenda, I think that would be a recommendation I would give other folks that engage with Connex.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, Pete, thank you so much. I appreciate you sharing your thoughts with us.
Of course. Thank you, Ben.